There are moments in life that split time in two, before and after. A single instant that rearranges everything you thought you understood about yourself, about family, about where you belong in the world. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening in late October, when I was 25 years old, standing at the front door of a house I had lived in for 7 years, staring at my own luggage lined up on the porch, like a quiet, deliberate sentence. My name is Aurelia Kane, and this is the story of the birthday that broke me open, and the 2 years that rebuilt me into someone I am genuinely proud to be. I want to start at the beginning because the expulsion didn't arrive without warning. Looking back now, from the distance of 2 years and a life that finally feels like mine, I can see the signs clearly. They were always there, threaded through every holiday dinner, every small dismissal, every compliment that somehow never quite landed on me. But when you are young and desperate for belonging, you learn to translate cruelty into something softer. You call it strictness. You call it high standards. You tell yourself that this is simply how some people love. My parents died in a car accident when I was 17. I won't dwell on that grief here. It deserves its own silence, its own sacred space. What I will say is that when they were gone, the only family left was my aunt, Genevieve Thorpe, my mother's older sister. A tall, composed woman with immaculate posture and a habit of speaking in measured tones that made everything she said sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. Genevieve took me in. That is the sentence I repeated to myself for years, like a debt I could never fully repay. She took me in, as if shelter were a gift rather than a basic human obligation to a grieving 17-year-old who had just lost everything. I cleaned the house. I cooked on weeknights. I babysat her daughter, my cousin Briar, without complaint. I folded myself smaller and smaller to fit the space they allowed me, which grew narrower with every passing year. Briar was 2 years younger than me, and she was, in Genevieve's eyes, luminous. Everything Briar wanted, Briar received. Her bedroom was redecorated twice. She had a car at 18. When she struggled in school, tutors appeared. When I struggled, and I did struggle, quietly, invisibly, I was told that resilience was a virtue, and that I should be grateful for what I had. I was grateful. That was the tragedy of it. I was profoundly, exhaustingly grateful. The house itself was nice enough. A well-maintained colonial in a quiet suburb outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with cream-colored walls and oak floors that creaked in the hallway near the bathroom. I knew every sound of that house. I knew which step on the staircase groaned at 2 a.m. I knew the particular way the kitchen light flickered in winter, and how the back garden smelled after rain, like earth and cedar and something faintly sweet I could never identify. I had poured 7 years of my life into those walls. I thought of it, in some quiet corner of my heart, as home. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. The weeks leading up to my 25th birthday had been tense in a way I couldn't quite name. Genevieve had been distant, more clipped than usual, more deliberate in her silences. I caught her watching me sometimes, with an expression I couldn't decode. Not anger exactly. Something more calculated than anger. I told myself it was stress. She was managing a career transition, and Briar had recently started college, and maybe the house felt different with one fewer person in it. I made excuses. I was very good at making excuses for her. I had mentioned casually, over dinner a few weeks earlier, that I was thinking about looking for an apartment. I was 24 going on 25, earning a modest but steady income doing remote bookkeeping work, and something in me was quietly yearning for space that belonged entirely to myself. Genevieve had nodded slowly and said nothing. I took her silence as neutrality. I should have recognized it as something else. My birthday fell on a Tuesday that year, October 23rd. I had not expected a party. I had learned to release that expectation years earlier. But I had hoped, in the small and human way one always hopes, for something. A cake, perhaps. A dinner. Some acknowledgement that the day meant something. I came home from work at 5:30 in the evening to find my suitcase, the large navy one I'd had since college, sitting beside 2 cardboard boxes on the front porch. My winter coat was folded on top. My books were stacked in the smaller box with a precision that told me this had been planned, carefully, over time. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was thrown. Everything was arranged with the same controlled neatness that characterized everything Genevieve did. She was standing in the doorway when I came up the front path, arms folded, wearing a gray cashmere cardigan I had once told her looked beautiful on her. "I've packed your things," she said. "I think it's time you found your own place." I stood there on the front path with the October wind moving through the maple trees overhead, dropping leaves in slow amber spirals around me, and I felt something inside me go very, very still. I think it's time you found your own place. No happy birthday. No explanation. No warning. Just my life in boxes and a door already half closing. I asked her why. My voice was steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt, which was like standing at the edge of something vast and dark, and suddenly having the ground tilt. She tilted her head slightly. You said yourself you were thinking about moving. I thought I'd help the decision along. A pause. This is Briar's home. It always has been. You've had years to get yourself together, Aurelia. Some people just need a push. Some people just need a push. I have thought about those words many times in the 2 years since. I have turned them over in my hands like a stone, examining them from every angle, trying to understand how a woman could arrange her niece's belongings in boxes on her birthday and call it generosity, a push, as though expulsion and encouragement were the same gesture, just delivered with different faces. I didn't cry. I want to tell you that clearly, not to perform strength, but because it's true, and it mattered. I didn't cry standing on that path. I looked at my aunt's composed face, at the door she was already retreating behind, at the boxes that contained the portable edition of my life, and I breathed. One breath, then another. I picked up my suitcase. I picked up the first box. I carried them to my car. I didn't ask for help. I didn't look back at the door to see if she was watching. I put everything I owned into the back of my small silver Honda, and I sat in the driver's seat in the amber October dusk, and I let the silence of that moment settle over me like something heavy and cold and absolutely real. I was 25 years old on that Tuesday. I had no apartment, no savings buffer, no plan. I had a car and a suitcase and 2 boxes of books, and the particular kind of loneliness that only comes when the people who were supposed to love you make it clear, at last, with unmistakable precision, that they never really did. Have you ever had someone you trusted make you feel completely disposable? Not through a dramatic explosion, but quietly, through something arranged, deliberate, and calm? If you have, then you already know what that Tuesday evening felt like for me. I sat in my car until the streetlights came on. Then I started the engine and drove away from the house that had never really been mine. I did not know on that night what was waiting for me 2 years ahead. I did not know about the mountains, or the inheritance, or the house made of stone and glass and my grandfather's quiet, enduring love. I did not know that the worst night of my life was also, in the most hidden and unexpected way, the beginning of everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. That night I simply drove, and the road was dark, and the wind was cold, and I was alone in a way I had never been before, which also meant, though I couldn't feel it yet, that I was finally, completely free. There is a particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I learned that on the night of October 23rd, parked in the lot of a 24-hour grocery store 3 miles from Genevieve's house, engine idling, the heater pushing warm air against my knees while the rest of me stayed frozen in a way no vent could reach. The parking lot was fluorescent and indifferent. A man pushed a cart of bagged groceries to a minivan. A teenager sat on the curb eating chips from a bag, headphones on, entirely unbothered by the world. Everyone around me was simply living their ordinary Tuesday evening, and I was sitting inside the wreckage of mine, trying to remember how to breathe correctly. My phone had 3 missed calls, all from Briar. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment. Briar, who had grown up in the bedroom down the hall from mine. Briar, who I had driven to school during her sophomore year when Genevieve was traveling. Briar, who I had helped with her college application essays, sitting at the kitchen table until past midnight, reading draft after draft, telling her she was more articulate than she gave herself credit for. I had loved Briar with the particular tenderness of someone who had no siblings and was trying very hard to manufacture the feeling from whatever material was available. I did not call her back. Not because I was angry at her. I wasn't, or at least not yet, but because I knew with a clarity that surprised me that whatever Briar had to say had already been approved by her mother. Briar did not make unsanctioned gestures. She never had. Whatever comfort she was calling to offer would arrive pre-shaped, pre-limited, within the boundaries Genevieve had drawn. And I was too tired, on that particular night, for comfort that came with invisible conditions attached. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with the silence. The grocery store's sliding doors opened and closed in a slow mechanical rhythm. Open, close, open, close. like something breathing. I watched them for a while because it was easier than thinking, and thinking was what I was desperately trying to postpone. If I started thinking, really thinking, about what had just happened, about the fact that I had no place to sleep, about the 7 years I had invested in a household that had just returned me, like something borrowed and no longer needed, I wasn't sure I could keep the stillness that was holding me together. So I watched the doors, open, close, and I counted my breathing, and I stayed. Around 9 o'clock, I drove to a neighborhood I knew well, a quiet residential street near a park where I used to run on weekend mornings. I pulled to the curb beneath a large oak tree, turned off the engine, and reclined my seat as far as it would go. My navy suitcase pressed against the back of my seat. The boxes of books sat silent behind me. I pulled my winter coat, the one Genevieve had folded so neatly on top, over my body like a blanket, and I closed my eyes. I did not sleep for a long time. What I did instead was replay the scene on the porch, frame by frame, the way your mind does when it is trying to locate the exact moment something became irreversible. Her arms folded, the gray cashmere cardigan. Some people just need a push. I kept returning to her face, looking for something in it I might have missed. A flicker of hesitation, a shadow of guilt, some evidence that what she had done had cost her something. I found nothing. Her expression had been, above all things, composed, almost relieved, as though she had been carrying a decision for a long time and was grateful to finally set it down. That, I think, was the detail that hurt most. Not the cruelty of it, but the ease. I want to be honest with you here, because this story is not about pretending the hard parts weren't hard. That night in the car was one of the lowest points of my life. I was 25 years old with a college degree and a steady remote job, and I was sleeping in a Honda Civic under an oak tree because the person who was supposed to be my family had packed my belongings into boxes with more care than she had ever shown my feelings. I felt small. I felt erased. And beneath the smallness, I felt something I'm almost embarrassed to admit even now. I felt like maybe she was right. Maybe I had overstayed. Maybe I had been too much, or not enough, or simply the wrong kind of person to deserve staying. That is what long-term emotional neglect does. It doesn't arrive as a single blow. It accumulates slowly, quietly, like dust settling on a surface, until one day you can no longer see the original color of the thing beneath. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by someone who was supposed to protect you, I want you to pause here and hear me say this clearly. That feeling is not the truth. It is the residue of their limitations, not the measure of your worth. I didn't believe that yet, on October 23rd, but I'm telling you now, from the other side of it. The weeks that followed were, in practical terms, survivable. I was fortunate in ways I knew to count. My remote bookkeeping work was stable. I had a small emergency fund, not large, but enough to cover a deposit and first month's rent on a studio apartment, which I found within 10 days through a listing app at 2 a.m, lying reclined in my car, scrolling with one hand and eating crackers from a sleeve I'd bought at that fluorescent grocery store. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted building in downtown Asheville, small enough that I could cross it in 11 steps, with a single window that looked out over a narrow alley and a fire escape where someone had placed a terracotta pot of dead herbs. It was the most beautiful place I had ever lived. That is not sarcasm. I mean it with the full weight of what I felt when I carried my 2 boxes and my suitcase up those 3 flights of stairs and closed the door behind me and sat on the bare floor with my back against the wall and felt, for the first time in 7 years, that every inch of the air around me was unmonitored. No footsteps in the hallway I needed to interpret. No careful calibration of my tone at dinner. No performance of gratitude. Just silence and 11 steps of space and a window over an alley. And me. I cried then. Finally, fully, without restraint. Not from sadness exactly, or not only from that, from relief. From the strange, disorienting experience of discovering that solitude, which I had always been taught to fear, felt something like oxygen. The first 3 months were lean. I bought a second-hand mattress and a folding table and a single chair. I cooked simple things, rice and roasted vegetables, soups that lasted several days, eggs in every variation I could devise. I worked long hours. I did not go out much. I did not speak to Genevieve or Briar. Briar sent 2 text messages in November. Brief, carefully worded, the kind of messages that expressed concern while carefully avoiding accountability. I read them both. I did not respond to either. I was not performing silence. I was not executing some strategic plan for revenge or reclamation. I was simply, for the first time in my adult life, choosing what I allowed into my space. And those messages, however well-intentioned in their way, were attached to a world I was still learning to separate myself from. Every contact was a thread pulling me back toward the version of Aurelia who folded herself small to fit. I was done being that version. I just didn't have language for it yet. What I did have, in those early months, was a growing and surprising sense of capability. I was managing. Not comfortably, not yet, but genuinely, independently managing. I was paying my own rent, feeding myself, keeping my client accounts in order, sleeping in my own bed, waking to my own silence. Small things, ordinary things. But after 7 years of existing at the sufferance of someone else's tolerance, ordinary felt extraordinary. And somewhere in that ordinary, something in me was quietly, steadily beginning to stand back up. I did not know yet about the letter from the estate attorney. I did not know about my grandfather, Edwin Langford, and what he had been holding for me all along, and what was waiting at the end of a mountain road I had never traveled. That chapter was still ahead. But the woman who would eventually walk up that road, composed, unhurried, carrying her own key, was already beginning to form quietly in an 11-step apartment above an alley in Asheville, in the months after the birthday that sent her there, and she was stronger than either of us knew. Strength, I have learned, is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive on a specific morning with clean edges and a feeling of readiness. It comes instead the way light comes into a room with old curtains, slowly, in thin lines, through the gaps, until one day you realize the room is brighter than it was, and you cannot point to the exact moment the change began. My room got brighter somewhere around the 4th month. I had settled into a rhythm by then. Alarm at 6:45. Coffee. The good kind. The one indulgence I allowed myself. Dark roast from a small local roaster 2 blocks down, whose shop smelled of warm wood and something faintly smoky. I would sit at my folding table with the mug in both hands and watch the alley below come to life. The restaurant worker arriving for prep, the cat that belonged to no one and everyone moving along the fire escapes, the particular blue of early winter light on brick. These small, unremarkable things became the architecture of my recovery. Routine as shelter. Ordinariness as medicine. My work expanded during those months in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had been doing remote bookkeeping for 3 small business clients when I left Genevieve's house. By February, 4 months later, I had 7. Word traveled through the networks of small business owners in a way that felt almost organic, like I had simply opened a door and people had walked through it. I raised my rates carefully, and the client stayed. I hired a part-time subcontractor to handle overflow. I was not wealthy. I was comfortable, which after years of carefully managed scarcity felt like an entirely different category of living. I did not think about Genevieve often. That surprised me. I had expected her to occupy more space in my mind, expected to lie awake reconstructing arguments, rehearsing the things I should have said on the porch, feeling the particular restless heat of unresolved anger. But the apartment had a quality of stillness that seemed to absorb all of that slowly over time, like soil absorbing rain. Some evenings I would catch a ghost of it, a memory rising briefly, the gray cashmere cardigan, the boxes. Some people just need a push. And I would note it with something that felt less like pain and more like observation. A fact about the past. Not a wound I was still living inside. That, I think, is what healing actually looks like. Not the dramatic moment of release people describe in movies. Just the gradual, unremarkable discovery that something that once filled your whole chest now fits inside a much smaller space. The letter arrived in March, 5 months after the birthday. It came in a cream-colored envelope with a return address I didn't recognize, a law office in Hendersonville, North Carolina, about 40 minutes south of Asheville. The name on the letterhead was Caldwell and Marsh, estate attorneys. I opened it standing in my hallway still wearing my coat, and I read the first paragraph twice before the meaning of the words fully resolved. It was regarding the estate of Edwin Langford, my grandfather. He had died the previous September, 6 weeks before my birthday, I would later calculate, though I hadn't known. Genevieve had not told me. I sat with that fact for a long time when I understood it. She had known. She had known he was gone, and she had said nothing, and 6 weeks later she had packed my things in boxes and set them on the porch, and I wondered, in the silence of that realization, whether the timing had been deliberate, whether something in his death had freed her to do what perhaps she had been waiting years to do. I will never know that for certain, but I know what I came to believe. The letter requested my presence at the offices of Caldwell and Marsh at my earliest convenience to discuss a matter of inheritance. The language was formal, careful, the kind of measured legal prose that gives nothing away. I called the following morning. I drove to Hendersonville the following week. The attorney was a quiet man named Gerald Marsh, in his 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered consequential information many times and understood the value of patience. He offered me water. I accepted. We sat across a wide oak desk, and he opened a folder, and he told me about my grandfather. Edwin Langford had been, in many respects, a man I barely knew. My mother had been closer to him than Genevieve was. There had been a fracture between Edwin and Genevieve years before I was born, something old and unresolved that no one had ever explained to me clearly. When my mother died, I had seen Edwin only once afterward, briefly, at the funeral. He was a tall man with white hair and careful eyes who had held my hands in both of his and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. I had been 17 and overwhelmed, and I hadn't known what to do with that silence. I had looked away. I had thought about that moment many times since. Edwin had, according to Gerald Marsh, maintained a trust in my name since I was 19 years old. Not a large financial trust, though there was a modest account attached, but primarily a property trust. He had purchased a house in the mountains outside of Black Mountain, North Carolina, in the year I turned 21. He had been renovating it slowly, steadily, over the following years, with specific instructions attached to the trust regarding its final condition and disposition. The house was to come to me, fully, upon his death, on the condition that I was 25 or older at the time of transfer. I had turned 25 on October 23rd. Gerald Marsh slid a photograph across the desk. I picked it up with both hands. The house sat on a ridge above a valley, surrounded by old-growth trees, oak and hemlock, and the particular deep green of mountain laurel. It was built from local stone and dark timber, with a wraparound porch and a wall of south-facing windows that would catch the afternoon light in long gold panels. A creek ran along the lower edge of the property, visible as a silver line in the corner of the photograph. The mountains rose behind it in blue layers, range after range, the way they do in that part of North Carolina, like the land had folded itself into patience. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I set the photograph down carefully on the desk. I looked at Gerald Marsh. I asked him how large the property was. He told me. I nodded. I asked about the condition of the house. He told me the renovations were approximately 80% complete. Edwin had overseen them personally until his health declined. There was a local contractor, a woman named Patrice, who had been continuing the work on a retainer from the trust and was expecting my call. I drove to the property that same afternoon, alone, without telling anyone, which felt important. This first seeing felt like something that should happen in private, between me and whatever my grandfather had built for me in the years I hadn't known he was watching. I took the mountain road slowly, because the curves were steep and because I wasn't in a hurry. The late March light was pale and particular, the kind that makes everything look freshly painted. When I came around the final bend and the house appeared on the ridge above me, I stopped the car. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. He had known, I thought. Somehow, across the distance and the silence and the years, Edwin Langford had known what my life was and what I might need, and he had built it for me anyway. He had not intervened, had not inserted himself into the machinery of my daily survival, but he had prepared something. He had held something in trust, in the most literal sense of that word. I got out of the car. I walked up the stone path to the front door. The key Gerald Marsh had given me turned smoothly in the lock. I stepped inside, and the smell of the place reached me first. Pine and stone and sawdust, and the cool, clean air of high elevation, and something underneath all of it that I cannot precisely name, except to say that it smelled like safety. I spent the following 8 months working with Patrice to finish the house. I drove up from Asheville on weekends, and then on weekdays, and eventually I moved my work entirely to the mountain and lived in the unfinished rooms while the finishing happened around me. I chose the paint colors. I selected the fixtures. I walked the property in the early mornings when the mist was still in the valley and the birds were beginning and the world felt enormous and quiet and entirely, completely mine. I did not post about it online. I did not tell anyone. Not a single person in my previous life knew that Aurelia Kane, who had been sent away with boxes on her birthday, was living on a mountain in a stone house her grandfather had built for her out of love. Would you have told anyone? Or would you, like me, have needed that time to simply exist inside the truth of it, privately, completely, before the world could have opinions about it? I kept my silence like something precious, and I healed inside it, fully, into a version of myself I had never had the space to become before. The mountain has a particular silence in November. Not the silence of absence, not empty or hollow or lonely. A full silence. The kind that has weight and texture, that presses gently against your skin when you step onto the porch in the early morning with your coffee cup warm between your palms. The kind that makes you understand, in the body before the mind, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. I was 27 years old when Genevieve called. 2 years, 1 month, and 11 days after she had stood in a gray cashmere cardigan and told me some people just need a push. I was standing at the south-facing windows of my living room, the ones that catch the afternoon light in long gold panels, exactly as I had imagined from the photograph, watching the valley below disappear slowly into the low November clouds. A fire was going in the stone hearth behind me. The house smelled of wood smoke and the rosemary focaccia I had baked that morning, still cooling on the kitchen counter. Outside, the old hemlocks were moving slowly in a wind I couldn't hear through the glass. My phone buzzed on the window ledge beside my coffee cup. Genevieve Thorpe. I looked at the name for a long moment, long enough to notice that my pulse did not quicken, long enough to notice that my hands were steady, that my chest felt open and unhurried, that the peace of the room remained intact around me like something solid. Whatever she was calling to say had no power to reach the person standing at that window. I understood that in the 3 seconds before I answered, and it was a remarkable thing to understand. I picked up the phone. Aurelia. Her voice was the same, controlled, measured, each syllable placed with deliberate care. But underneath the control, and I could hear it now in a way I hadn't been able to before, perhaps because I was no longer afraid of her, there was something unfamiliar, a tightness, the particular vocal quality of a person who is managing something they hadn't anticipated having to manage. Genevieve, I said. Not Aunt Genevieve. I had made that decision without consciously making it. A brief pause. She noted the omission, I am certain. She simply chose not to address it. I'm calling because I've heard something rather extraordinary, she said. About a property, in Black Mountain. Another pause, shorter. A stone house on Ridgeline Road. I said nothing. I watched the clouds move into the valley. I was speaking with Margaret Holt. You may not remember her. She attended your mother's funeral. And she mentioned that she'd driven past the Langford property recently, and that there was someone living there. Someone young. Her voice thinned slightly on the next words as though they resisted being spoken. She said it looked like you. It was me, I said. The silence that followed was the most eloquent thing Genevieve Thorpe had ever communicated. I could hear her recalibrating inside it, rearranging. I imagined her in her kitchen, the one with the cream walls and the oak floors that creaked, sitting very straight in a chair, one hand flat on the table, the way she always sat when she was thinking. That is your grandfather's house, she said at last. It's my house, I said. Edwin left it to me. The transfer was completed through Caldwell and Marsh in March of last year. I have the deed. Another silence. Longer this time. Aurelia. Her tone shifted. And this was the part I had not fully anticipated. Not because it surprised me, but because of how naked it was. The control was still there, but it had become a frame around something genuinely desperate. That house, that property, your grandfather and I had an understanding. Years ago. That when the time came, the mountain house would... Genevieve, I said, quietly, firmly, the way you close a door that has been open too long. Whatever understanding you believed you had with Edwin was not documented in his estate. I have seen every document. My name is on the deed. The trust was established when I was 19. You were 19, she said, and now there was an edge beneath the measured tone, something that wanted to be indignation but couldn't quite achieve it. You were a child. He couldn't have... He did, I said. He did, and he was entirely within his rights, and the estate was managed by a licensed attorney and is not in any legal dispute. I paused. Is there something specific I can help you with today? The question landed the way I intended it, not cruelly, but with a precision that left no room for reinterpretation. I was not her niece seeking approval at the dinner table. I was a 27-year-old woman on her own property, taking a phone call she had no obligation to take. When Genevieve spoke again, the architecture of her composure had shifted in a way I had never heard before. Something in it had come down. I would like to see it, she said. And then quietly, in a register I had never once heard from her in 10 years. I would like to come and stay, for a little while. The house in town feels, things have been difficult recently. Briar is in Seattle now, and I've been... She stopped, started again. It's a large property, there's clearly enough room. I thought perhaps... No, I said. One word. No caveat, no softening, no elaborate explanation offered as compensation for the directness of it. Just the clean, complete sound of a boundary held by someone who had learned, at significant cost, that she was allowed to have them. The silence that followed was different from the others. This one had a quality of finality. I think she felt it too. Aurelia, I wish you well, Genevieve, I said. And I meant it. That was the part that might be hardest to believe, but it was true. I was not standing at my window full of rage or triumph, or the hot, restless energy of revenge. I was full of wood smoke and rosemary and mountain air, and the profound, quiet satisfaction of a person who had rebuilt her life from the ground up and was standing inside the proof of it. There was no room left in me for bitterness. It had been slowly, steadily displaced by something better. I genuinely wish you well, but this house is mine. My grandfather built it for me, and I live here, and that will not be changing. I think we both know that this conversation has reached its natural end. I heard her breathe. One careful, controlled breath. Right, she said, barely above a murmur. Goodbye, I said. I ended the call. I set the phone back on the window ledge. I picked up my coffee cup. The clouds had descended fully into the valley now, and the house was above them, sitting in the pale winter light with the hemlocks moving in their slow, unhurried way, and the fire crackling behind me, and the focaccia cooling on the counter, and the creek running somewhere below in the cold that I couldn't hear but knew was there. I have thought about that call many times since, not with satisfaction exactly, or not only that, with something more complex and more quiet. I think about what it costs a person to reach the age Genevieve had reached, to have moved through the world the way she had moved through it, strategic, controlled, focused on what she could acquire and protect, and to arrive at a November afternoon calling a niece she had expelled on her birthday, asking for something she could not leverage or demand. I think she believed on some deep and unexamined level that what she had given me, the shelter, the years, the roof, had accrued into a kind of permanent claim on me, that I would always, at some level, owe her, that the debt was renewable, indefinite, and she could collect on it whenever the terms suited her. What she had not calculated was that I had paid that debt every single day for 7 years, in labor and gratitude and carefully managed smallness. And when she sent me away, she didn't cancel the debt. She receipted it. She handed me the proof, in boxes on a porch, that we were square, that I owed her nothing, that I had never owed her anything beyond what I had already given. My grandfather understood something about me that she never did. He understood that a person who has been made to feel small for long enough will either disappear into the smallness or eventually, quietly, grow past it. He didn't know which I would choose, but he prepared the house just in case. He left me the mountain and trusted me to find my way to it. I think about that every morning when I step onto the porch and the valley is below me and the light is coming through the hemlocks in long, slow bars of gold. I think about Edwin Langford, who held something in trust for me through all the years I didn't know he was watching, who loved me in the most patient, enduring, material way a person can love someone, by preparing a place for them to land. I don't know what your version of this story looks like. Maybe you have a Genevieve in your life, someone who has spent years making you feel like a guest in your own existence, like your presence is provisional, like love is a ledger and you are always somehow in deficit. Maybe you are in the October 23rd of your own story right now, sitting in a parking lot under fluorescent lights, trying to figure out how to survive the next week. If you are, I want you to hear this from someone standing on the other side of it. The ground comes back. It comes back slowly and in pieces and not always in the shape you expected, but it comes back. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, what rises in its place is so much larger and more solid than what fell that you can barely remember, from the inside of it, how small you used to live. I live on a mountain now. My grandfather built it for me from stone. No one can pack it in boxes and leave it on a porch. And every morning when the mist is in the valley and the fire is going and the coffee is dark and good, I say thank you. To Edwin, to the version of myself that survived that parking lot, to every quiet choice I made in the 11-step apartment that pointed me, without my fully knowing it, toward this ridge, this light, This life, it is mine. Completely, entirely, irrevocably mine. And that, I have learned, makes all the difference. If Aurelia's story moved something in you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to protect you, or if you're still waiting for your own mountain, leave a comment below and tell me. I read every single one. This channel exists because real stories deserve to be told with the care and dignity they earned. I'll see you in the next one.